Good morning and good afternoon, class. So, guys, what I want to do is pick off where we left off yesterday. So, yesterday, we left off talking about Darwin and how he developed his idea for natural selection. Once again, he didn't wake up just one day and be like, natural selection, I got it. No, it took a lot of influencing from different scientists, things that he read, colleagues of his that helped him shape his idea. But once again, his idea of natural selection is this idea that, there's variations that always exist in a population. And some variations are just better than others, and it allows them to survive better. And when you get to survive, your main reward is you get to mate and you get to pass down these favorable traits, these adaptations down to your offspring, and they're going to have a better chance of survival as well. Once again, this is kind of what he developed, once again, over 20 years of research and studying. Now, something else he studied, though, was something that was called artificial selection. And this is where, something he noticed that farmers and ranchers were doing back in England is that they were breeding plants and animals that had desirable traits, maybe the plants that gave the biggest yield of crops, or animals like with horses, maybe those that were the fastest horses. They would try to mate them with each other to try to replicate that type of horse that was really fast. And this is something that was termed artificial selection. This is when humans selectively breed plants or animals with these desirable traits. And what Darwin reasoned was that if by artificial selection, we could get a lot of change in a short period of time, within 1 or 2 or 3 generations, then that this was probably happening in nature as well, except in nature, it takes a lot longer. When it comes to nature, we're talking thousands of generations. So we're talking thousands, millions of years for this to kind of occur, for this kind of selection, but not artificially, but by nature. Here are some examples of some artificial selection. For example, the Belgian cows that we talked about that have the myostatin mutation, where they have a lot more muscle mass. That's something that is now selectively breeded because they could sell that beef for a lot higher prices. You usually see these in stock shows like FFA. They usually will artificially breed those animals. So to summarize, when it comes to natural selection, once again, organisms with favorable variations for a certain environment will survive. And if you survive, once again, your reward is you reproduce and you pass these variations down to your offspring, which we pretty much summarize or paraphrase into this one phrase called survival of the fittest. Now, Darwin never actually coined this term or even used it. This was people afterwards that kind of read it and kind of summarized it into this term. Now, don't get the misconception though. Some students think survival of the fittest. Oh, that means the strongest survive. No, doesn't really necessarily have to do with strength. When it comes to being fit, our definition of fitness is being able to survive and being able to reproduce. You have to be able to reproduce. If you don't reproduce, if you could have all this strength, but you don't reproduce, that's horrible fitness. So survival of the fittest, once again, make sure you start thinking about being able to survive and reproduce. Now, other key terms, variations. There has to be differences. If there's no differences in a population, you're not going to see natural selection work. There always are variations usually in a population. And the environment. The environment is what ends up selecting what variation might be an advantage. For example, here we have 3 different colors, 3 different fur colors of rabbits. We have white, brown, black. So if a rabbit lived in an environment where it snowed all the time, what color of fur would be most advantageous? So if it snowed all the time, which one do you guys think it would be? I'm thinking you guys are saying the white one, and that would be correct. Why? Well, because they could camouflage with the white snow. That's an advantage. It's going to be able to mate more, pass down that coloration down to its offspring. Now, does that mean there's never going to be any black or brown? Not necessarily. These could probably still be in the population, but will their numbers ever be really high? Probably not. Their numbers will not really be high because they're going to be a little bit easier to pick off than the white bunny. Another example, this is our classic example, something that you probably read about your freshman year, is the peppered moth during the Industrial Revolution, where before the Industrial Revolution, the trees were very light in color, like this right here. And what happened is the light colored moths blended in really well. And notice how the black ones stick out. So the population was very high with light colored moths, but the population of dark colored moths was very low. Then the Industrial Revolution comes along, starts pumping in a lot of smoot up in the air, smog, pollution. It comes down, it covers the trees, and it makes them really, really dark. So notice now who has the advantage. The dark ones blend in really, really well, where the light ones, they stick out like a sore thumb. So we saw a population shift here where now the dark ones were high in number and the light ones were very less. It decreased in their number. So a couple of important points to remember about evolution by natural selection. Guys, individuals do not evolve, populations will evolve. Once again, if an individual has an adaptation, some sort of variation that's favorable, it's not like that individual can be like, peace out, I'm out of here, and just leave that population. No, he has to mate or she has to mate. And that means that the entire population over time will evolve. Also, natural selection can only amplify or diminish heritable traits, traits that can be passed down. Environmental factors vary from place to place and from time to time. Once again, the environment ends up with what ends up being a favorable variation. And evolution by natural selection is not like a climb up a ladder of progress. Guys, it's not like the organisms are always getting better, that we're some sort of peak of perfection. There's no ultimate goal to evolution. Once again, it's always the environment that changes dramatically and could select for different adaptations, different variations. For example, here's now, some people were like, well, natural selection, I don't think it's true. We don't see examples. Guys, we see several examples of natural selection. For example, we see it with pests. For example, here we have a population of pests. And, there's a huge population and there's always variation. There's differences in these populations. Now, what farmers will do is they'll get in their planes and they'll, put this pesticide that will wipe out, maybe 98% of the population. But just because there's variation, there's maybe 1, 2, maybe 3 or 4 of these pests, just because they have a gene, they have a mutation where this pesticide doesn't affect them. Maybe this pesticide doesn't bond to a certain protein that they're not making. So that means they survive. And if they survive, what's their reward? That's right, they get to mate. And if they mate, guess who they pass down that variation, that mutation to? They pass it down to their offspring. And after a couple of years, you're going to have now this huge population of pests that are resistant to this pesticide. And that's why usually farmers have to constantly be changing their pesticides every 3 to 4 years, because after a while, the pesticide is no longer effective when it comes to these insects, these pests. Here's another example how HIV caused by a virus, that evolves very, very quickly. Some of the first drugs that we had for HIV seemed promising very early in the weeks that were given to patients, but we noticed how that virus just once again just was able to become resistant. Once again, some of the viruses weren't, because of just changes, variations that they had, wasn't being affected. They ended up reproducing and passing that down. And a lot of these drugs are now being resistant, or HIV has become resistant to a lot of these drugs. Now, so let's talk about these adaptations. So an adaptation, once again, is any trait that aids the chances of survival and reproduction of an organism in a specific environment. So in other words, it's any characteristic that gives an organism an edge in its environment. Now, there's 3 types of adaptations that we see in nature. We have structural, we have physiological, and we have behavioral. These are the 3 types of adaptation. So let's look at the first one, structural. Now, a structural adaptation, this is a change in the structure of an organism's body parts. So it's usually something on the outside, something that you can actually see. For example, thorns, spines, camouflage, or mimicry. Guys, thorns, what organisms have thorns? Hopefully you were guys maybe saying, oh, what about a rose? Yes, rose plants have thorns. Guys, what do those thorns do for rose plants? They help them survive. Once again, herbivores usually will come in, try to eat some of those rose plants, and they're going to get stuck by those thorns, and they're going to leave them alone, and that helps them survive, and they pass down that variation down to their offspring. Spines, camouflage, mimicry. For example, here we have an excellent example of camouflage. If you guys look at this picture carefully, hopefully you see that organism. Do you guys see it? If you do, what is it? If you said praying mantis, you are right. Guys, look at this. That's just amazing camouflage. We have our praying mantis right here. Here's the head. Here you kind of see the antenna. You see the body right here. We see one leg, two legs, the forearms, a back leg. Here's the kind of backside. Here's another leg. Just once again, amazing camouflage. Once again, blending into its environment. Now, how does this help it survive? Well, first of all, it could avoid predators, but also it could catch its prey a lot easier. You could imagine maybe a little butterfly thinking like, oh, I'm going to go get me some sweet nectar from that flower, gets close, and whoosh, that praying mantis will just grab it, start munching on it, and be able to survive a lot better, being able to catch that food a lot easier. Here's another example. This right here, known as a walking stick. These, cockroaches I could stand, other bugs. For some reason, walking sticks, these just give me the willy jibbies. I just freak out when I see them, especially here in Texas. They're just huge. One time I sat on a log and it was actually a walking stick that just started moving. So here you kind of see one right here blending into its environment really well. Here are some other examples. Do you guys see what's in this picture? If you said a lizard, yes, look at that. Once again, just amazing camouflage. This one right here, hopefully you see the hoo-hoo. That's right, an owl right here. Once again, just amazing camouflage. And actually, I want to show you a video. This is a video of an organism that lives in the ocean that has some of the most amazing camouflage that I have ever seen. So I'm going to play it. You're also going to hear the audio in it. So guys, once again, just look at it carefully. Once again, I think this is going to blow you away. Guys, if you're wearing your socks and sandals, you better take them off because I think they might just blow your Crocs off your feet. So let's see. Hopefully this will work. Okay. So see if you could find where this octopus is possibly at. So once again, that's pretty amazing. But guys, check this out. They're going to play the video backwards and just look at how amazing this camouflage is. Guys, that, once again, that's amazing camouflage. Once again, that just blows me away. Imagine if you had this type of camouflage, you're walking at school and you just kind of blend into the wall. That's pretty awesome. So once again, these are all examples of camouflage. So now let's look at another example still of structural adaptation. Structural adaptation, once again, this is something on the outside. This is called mimicry. Once again, this is called mimicry. This is where one species ends up copying another species over time because it gives it an advantage. Examples: bee orchid, king snake, and coral snake, viceroy, and monarch butterfly, which is shown right here. Guys, this right here is our monarch butterfly, which, guys, the monarch butterfly, because it has this pattern, this is the viceroy right here. Now, the monarch butterflies, when birds try to eat the monarch butterfly, they don't really like it. When they start chewing it up, there's like a toxin that gets released by the monarch butterfly, and the birds kind of spit it out. So they usually will try to eat one or two, but then they'll stay away from the monarch butterflies. And that's why we have so many. They usually actually do their migration right around spring, and we'll see them soon. This is the viceroy. Now, the viceroy, it's delicious. Birds love to eat the viceroy. They just, and they love it. But notice that its coloration, its pattern resembles now that of the monarch. Now, if you were a bird and you've eaten a couple monarchs one and you spit them out because you don't like them, and you see this one, can you really tell them apart? Probably not. So that means that the viceroy actually now has an advantage. And a lot of viceroys actually now look like monarch butterflies. And that's because, once again, they get that advantage. They're mimicking the monarch one. So once again, a structural adaptation, something on the outside. Here's another example. This is the bee orchid plant. And notice, I don't know if you guys notice, but this looks like a bee. It looks like a queen bee. Some people kind of say it looks like a duck, but no, it's supposed to be a bee. Now, what's the advantage? Why would a flower want to look like a queen bee? Well, if you're trying to pollinate and spread your pollen around, well, a bee could come in and be like, whoa, look at that hot queen, come in there, start rubbing itself all over that, picking up all sorts of pollen, and then it's like, psych, it's not even a queen bee. It leaves disappointed, but now it has a bunch of pollen all over it. It's going to help spread that pollen around, increasing its chances of reproduction. Here, another example. This is one that I think most of you kind of know. We have the eastern coral snake, very, very venomous. Here we have the king snake, non-venomous. And notice how they look very similar. The king snake has mimicked the coral snake. Guys, there's that saying that you could use, like, yellow and black, maybe, no, I think it's black and red, friend of Jack, or yellow and blacks. I don't know what the saying is, but I have a lot simpler one that you can use, which is, see a snake, run away. That's right. You should run away if you see a snake. You shouldn't be like, oh, well, let me go investigate and see what it is. If it's yellow and red, friend of, no, just run away if you see a snake. Okay, so we're almost done. So let's look at physiological adaptations. Now, this is something where there's a change in the organism's metabolic process, usually a job of a body part. It's something more internal that we don't really see. For example, drug resistance in bacteria and viruses, that would be example of a physiological adaptation, something inside, a change of a protein, a mutation. Pesticide resistance in insects as well. That would be a physiological adaptation. And then we have behavioral adaptations. And that is a change in an organism's behavior due to a response to the environment, like danger signals, mating rituals, hibernation. For example, what organism hibernates? Now, there's several, but I think the most common one is the bear. Bears usually go into hibernation during the winter. How does that help them survive? Well, when they hibernate during the winter, because there's no food sources available in the winter, they go into a deep sleep. They don't use a lot of energy. Their metabolism slows down completely and allows them to survive during those times where there might not be a lot of food around. So that ends this first set of notes over evolution. Guys, go back and make sure you review the influences of Darwin. He just, once again, didn't wake up one day and have this idea. Lamarck, Lyell, Hutton, Mathis, Wallace, all these individuals kind of helped him shape his idea. Make sure you know natural selection, what that is. Once again, favorable variations allow organisms to survive better than others, and they get to pass these down to the offspring. And then know about adaptations, the 3 different types of adaptations that we have: behavioral, structural, and physiological. Guys, your homework, make sure you're continuing to read that chapter 22. Guys, stay connected through Edmodo and Instagram. Check those daily. Zoom meetings are still going to be happening. So hopefully there'll still be a morning and afternoon session. And guys, don't forget the Instagram. I'm sorry. Yes, Instagram's already up. Don't forget the podcast. Go back, listen to the podcast, the latest episode. Remember, we have a quiz coming up on Friday, an Emoto quiz. So definitely to your benefit to listen to that podcast, to the latest episode. Well, guys, this is it for this first set of notes over evolution. Guys, I hope you all have an awesome day.